Hello and welcome to Top Story. Today, a hint of political change in Libya, where one of Muammar Gaddafi's sons has outlined plans for the country's first constitution since Gaddafi took power 38 years ago. In a speech to a crowd of 40,000 people in Benghazi that was broadcast live on state media, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi called for a national dialogue on reform to strengthen the Jamahiriya, a political system devised by his father. He said the new challenge facing Libya was to create a freely elected parliament, liberalise the media and decriminalise dissent. The alternative was corruption, fraud and falsification. But Saif al-Islam said some things should not be changed, among them the guiding role of his father and Libya's adherence to Sharia law. There's speculation that Muammar Gaddafi, who's in his 60s, may be grooming his son for power. But Saif al-Islam insisted in his speech that there would be no dynasty or monarchy in Libya. Well, joining me now from London to discuss the significance of the speech for Libya's political development is Saad Jabbar, an expert on Libya. Thanks very much for being on Top Story. Saif al-Islam Gaddafi says no dynasty, no monarchy in Libya, but it does rather look as though the public exposure he's getting at the moment is grooming him for power.
Well, without any doubt, if he comes to power, it will not be, or it will not be seen, or they have to create the circumstances for that, and he's doing exactly that. I mean, Gaddafi is not a monarch, therefore we cannot say it's a monarchy or succession or he's a crown prince or crown emir or whatever. However, I think Saif al-Islam realizes that there are many gaps and there are many failures of the regime, and for it to continue, some issues have to be addressed, especially in the light that Libya has ended its crisis with the international crisis from the Lockerbie to the nurses, and before that support for liberation movement. So everybody now is calling upon the regime in Libya to address the internal issues, which are really the defining factors for the stability of the regime and so on. And Saif al-Islam took it upon himself to point this out, to point out failures of the utilities in the health service, education, in the administration, which is run by the revolutionaries or revolutionary structures created by in accordance with the philosophy of his father. So he is not challenging the system. He's saying we have to make the system work, because he could see a big gap there which the opposition or opposition forces might step in. On the other hand, he doesn't want to leave any vacuum for the opposition forces, real dissidents, to emerge. Therefore, he wanted to be that person who will present himself as the opposition to the regime, but the loyal opposition of the system.
Saad Jabbar, you said took it upon himself to make this speech, but would it have been possible, is it possible for even the son of Colonel Gaddafi to make a speech like this without his approval first?
Well, if it was someone else saying exactly those words, he wouldn't have seen the light of the day for some time to come, or he might have been killed. But this is, the calls made by Saif al-Islam are calls in favor of this safeguarding, protecting and consolidating the existing regime. And he is pointing out, as I've said, he's pointing the failures to corruption and so on. These are the, let's say, these are the arguments, these are the criticisms which you see.
What I'm suggesting is he must have had his father's approval first before he made a speech like this.
Well, his father knows very well that Saif al-Islam doesn't represent any threat to him or challenge to him, but his son is telling him, look, it's better that we do it rather than someone else who is against us, against the regime and so on. So don't expect the calls for change and so on are going to amount to anything which might challenge the Gaddafi himself or the leadership of Gaddafi or the system which is in place, which was put in place by Gaddafi. That's why, this is, the Gaddafi has always arguing or has always maintained that he wasn't a president, but he's a leader. That means he's there in control of the country. Saif al-Islam is saying, I'm against the regime, but he is the opposition which supports the regime. He does not challenge the regime in any way. What he's saying is the youth, he wants to be the rallying point for the youth, for the disenchanted people, in order not to leave the way for the real hostile forces to the regime to emerge or to fill that vacuum. The message is very clear.
What he's suggesting as well, what Saif al-Islam is suggesting as well, does fit a pattern rather as well. First we saw the abandonment of the nuclear program, then more recently we've seen a shift towards economic reform, and now perhaps we're going to see a shift towards political reform. Do you see a pattern emerging?
That is the discourse, but whatever change takes place, political, economic, in the media and in the judiciary, it's going to be reforms or changes managed and controlled, changes which will not in any way breach or violate or encroach upon the essence of the regime, which the regime of the father, and indirectly Saif al-Islam is exposing himself.
Well, there's a contradiction involved
as the alternative.
There's a contradiction involved here as well. On the one hand, Saif al-Islam is saying there should be free political parties, a free parliament and a free media. But on the other hand, the guiding role of Muammar Gaddafi should remain in place. So how do you mix those two?
Well, Saif al-Islam is putting for himself forward psychologically, socially, and so on, for people to see that in case there is a vacuum in the top place, in case there is a vacancy at the top job, I am the man who will make sure that there will be smooth and safe switch off the guards or leadership. It is not done. That's why he's saying there is no dynasty and so on. But he's putting himself forward as the alternative when the time comes. Not to do it in the style of some other Arab countries where the son took over from the father, but he's doing it in such a well-studied, in well-managed way, in well-controlled way, regarding supporting the system and regarding paving the way for himself when that opportunity comes for him to take over.
So, Saad Jabbar, he said, apart from the need to preserve the leading role, the guiding role of Muammar Gaddafi, he said that the role of Sharia law should not be challenged either. How important has Sharia law been in the political system put in place in Libya by Muammar Gaddafi?
Let's not forget, when Gaddafi came to power, it was during the climax of the Cold War, communism and so on, and he was the antithesis of communism. He disliked communism until Nasser at the time said, look, the international situation is different. We have to counterbalance the Americans because of Israel, because of other international issues at play. Therefore, you have to really coexist with the communists. Then he started to understand that, and he played that card very well with the Soviet Union. But remember that Libya is a very conservative society. Islam plays a major role in their life.
I'm afraid, I'm sorry, we'll run out of time. I'm going to have to interrupt you there. That's all we have time for today. Thanks to Saad Jabbar in London. Join us again tomorrow for another edition of Top Story. Goodbye.